if you are experiencing mental health symptoms, you have some depressive symptoms, some anxiety, some struggles that you're dealing with. Maybe you're sad from navigating a relationship, and God forbid you were experiencing psychotic symptoms. There's just the thought of something must be wrong with you that is negative. So it's perceived from a spiritual standpoint. You
Yes.
must be demon possessed. You
Yes.
must be, some demonic force. There's a bad omen about you. Or we go to all these traditional cultural explanations or attributions where we say, "Oh, somebody has bewitched you."
Yes. Yeah, that's
Um,
very true.
or the attribution of saying there's some unresolved something down the generations
Yes.
that is following you because your grandfather didn't do XYZ or did XYZ. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
your grandfather married a prostitute, therefore, all these things. Or if you're struggling with substance abuse, the attribution is, oh, there must be something you did,
Mm-hmm.
which is why, like you're bewitched. So nobody would think about this is a mental health issue
Yes.
that is not your fault and
Mm-hmm.
can be resolved without exorcism or just prayer or going
Yes.
to a witch doctor because of the association that we had with it.
Good evening, everybody. This is Dolly Ochola of Kavaya's Daughter Speaks, and I'm here with Dr. Lilian Odera. Dr. Lilian Odera is a friend of mine. She's a licensed clinical psychologist. She's a worship leader. She's a sister. She's a friend. She's a counselor to other people. She's a confidant to other people. And I am very delighted to have her because I know she's an expert in what she does. So, Dr. Lilian, could you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, hello, everybody. It is wonderful to be a guest today on my very good friend Dolly's podcast, Kavaya's Daughter Speaks. I'm excited. And so I'm Lilian. People call me Lilian, Dr. Lil. I'm a psychologist, like Dolly mentioned. And I think she said the things about me. I'm kind of like a down to earth kind of person. I'm a psychologist and a minister, musician, a writer. So I do all that, and I try to weave all that into the things I do. So um, those are some of my passions, and more than anything, I enjoy talking about life and how we can navigate life in the healthiest ways possible.
Okay, Dr. Lilian. One thing I want you to tell us is, can you tell us something that we don't know about you? Something that even I don't know about you.
Something that you don't know about me: I don't like olives.
Okay, not something juicy, not something like you don't like olives.
Oh,
Something more interesting.
something more interesting: I don't use alarm clocks.
Oh,
I do not
okay.
use alarm clocks. I just wake up. Before I go to bed, I decide what time I'm going to wake up, and I wake up. Even today, this morning, despite the daylight savings time and the springing forward time, I did not set an alarm. I woke up when I knew I needed to get up.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Is it because you have a strict regimen and you just wake up at a specific time, or it fluctuates like depending on the need?
Oh, it fluctuates because on weekends I may want to sleep in a little bit, but even then I
Wow.
don't use an alarm clock. Even when I set an alarm clock, because of the kind of work I do in ministry, sometimes I have like early morning flights and I need to be on the road at 3, 4 in the morning or whatever it is. I set up an alarm just for good measure, but
Mm-hmm.
I still wake up before the alarm clock goes off because I do not like the sound of alarm clock. So that just so my body has a way of recognizing it's time to wake up. This body is very malleable. You can teach your body to do anything.
That's true. That's true. Wow. Okay, so that's something I did not know about you, and it's
You
something
didn't know that about me. I
no, I
don't.
did not. And there's no way I would function like that. No way. Unless maybe I woke up at a very specific time every day. I would never function like that. I have like 5 or 6 alarms on my phone for Monday to Tuesday, Wednesday, for this day, for Sunday, yes, Saturday. Yeah.
Well, here is something that we could learn from my experience
Mm-hmm.
is that your body will tell you when your body has had enough rest.
Yes, that's true.
The concept of alarm clocks means that we interrupt our sleep patterns.
That's true.
Yes.
So then that means you also go to bed depending on the time you're going to wake up, right? So you go to bed on time so that your body gets enough rest.
I try to do that.
Oh, okay. Okay. So, Dr. Lilian, today we are talking about culture
All
and mental
right.
health and stigma, right?
Okay.
And I love culture. I am proud of my culture. I enjoy other people's culture. I think culture brings the richness into this tapestry of life. And
Yeah.
I think we should embrace culture.
Mm-hmm.
But with culture comes some ups and downs and some things that are not so good.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to find out, where do you think um, the issues arise? So how important is culture when it comes to mental health?
Oh my.
Mm-hmm.
Culture is a fabric of that's the cradle of our existence, of our identities, of who we are, of our sense of belonging, of how we navigate the world. Cultural lenses are so important. Everybody has a culture.
Mm-hmm.
And so integrating culture, a lot of times we think of people from non-Western cultures are the ones who have culture, so to speak. But we
Mm-hmm.
all have a culture within us. We have norms and customs and behaviors and values and virtues and things that ways of doing life that either have been passed down through generations or that we have learned along the way as a result of being part of a subgroup of people that impact how we see ourselves and how we see the world around us. So I can't really separate culture from mental health because culture impacts how we see our mental health and
Mm-hmm.
how we interpret what's going on with our mental health and what we do when we're struggling with our mental health. So it's very important.
It's very important. I can think of one of the cultural things that I heard when I was growing up in Kenya, and that was, I'll say it in Swahili and then I'll interpret it.
Okay.
Which was whenever a woman who had what I did not know at that time had a baby, we would say kichwa yake inaruka akipata mtoto, meaning she goes crazy when she has a child.
Mm-hmm.
And I never knew what that was. I just thought that that was like some weird thing. And I didn't even know that after they go, I never thought about what happens after they go crazy. Do they become quote unquote normal after they go crazy? But now I know that that was postpartum depression, right?
Yes.
But we looked at it as someone going crazy, or in Spanish they say loco, right?
Yeah.
So what do you think the role culture, what role does culture play when it comes to stigma and mental health? Because pretty much all cultures have stigma around mental health. Some
Yes.
are a little bit better, and even those who are not as good are becoming better, but there's a role that culture plays on stigma regarding mental health. What do you think that role is?
Mm. Now that's a really good question. How mental health affects how stigma impacts mental health, right?
Yeah, yes, based on culture.
Based
Mhm.
on from a cultural standpoint.
Yes. Hmm.
Now, if we could think about, and maybe I can reference not just African cultures, but the cultures we come from, teachers how to handle situations we don't understand or things that are outside of what is considered normal.
Hmm.
And so, if we're not taught how to problem solve from a cultural standpoint in a healthy way, like when this happens, this is how you seek help. We are good with dealing with much more mundane issues or much more obvious issues.
Hmm.
That, if you're hungry, eat, if
Hmm.
you're, and we're better with medical or kind of like issues in terms of saying, oh, you have a cold, take something for that. You have a headache, take some painkillers for that. We do that, but when it comes to mental health, there's such stigma because all cultures, including Western cultures, it was much later on that mental health was even recognized. Because the same way you used the example of how African cultures would think of postpartum depression, even Western cultures would think of depression as hysteria. It would be called hysteria, that
Oh,
women
yes.
are being hysterical. And
Yes.
it was thought of like it's only women who get depressed
Yes.
because they get moody and hysterical. And when they're anxious, we're thinking, oh, they're being dramatic. That's even Western cultures would do that because the idea was if we can't see it,
Yes.
it doesn't exist. It
Yes.
must be something that's within your control to do. If we can't see it, it means you're making a decision to do it. And
Exactly.
so, if we think about our African cultures, or even non Western cultures, if I can think of Latina, Latinx cultures, if
Mm-hmm.
we think about Asian cultures, we think about Middle Eastern cultures. And then, of course, if we think about African cultures or Afrocentric people, whether they're Caribbean islanders or people from Africa, we are very collectivist, which means we have this mindset, this village mindset of we are always together. We're very family oriented. Everybody's in your business. You're in everybody's business. There's more of this group think, group
Mm-hmm.
fix, group
Mm-hmm.
solve. And so when we think about stigma in mental health, if you had an issue, everybody knew about it. If a woman was pregnant or had a baby, like using your example, and had a baby and was experiencing postpartum, everybody knew that
Yes.
because privacy is not a very African thing from a cultural standpoint.
Yes. It's
The
not.
village gets to know what's going on in your business. And
Yes.
so it also means that the village gets to decide how you deal with your issues.
Mm-hmm.
I
That's
mean,
true.
we didn't grow up with anything about I need my personal space.
No, there was
There was
nothing.
nothing like that. And
Yes.
so the idea was everybody has a say about how you deal with what's going on. And everybody, and even your own family, shares what's going on with you. How
Yes.
many times did you hear your mom went and shared your business with her friends or something? And, something that probably your kids now will not appreciate if you talk to some other people about their business.
Yes.
But
Yes.
because of that collectivist mindset, which is good, there are really good benefits to being collectivist. The stigma of mental health was if something is wrong with you, one, remember when I talked about because we can't see it,
Mm-hmm.
it's wrong or you have the agency to control it because
Yes.
that was the perception. If you are experiencing mental health symptoms, you have some depressive symptoms, some anxiety, some struggles that you're dealing with. Maybe you're sad from navigating a relationship, and God forbid you were experiencing psychotic symptoms. um there was there's just the thought of something must be wrong with you
Mm-hmm.
that is negative. So it's perceived from a spiritual standpoint. You
Yes.
must be demon possessed. You
Yes.
must be, some demonic force. There's a bad omen about you. Or we go to all these traditional cultural um explanations or attributions where we say, oh, somebody has bewitched you.
Yes. Yeah. That's
Um,
very true.
or the attribution of saying there's some unresolved something down the generations
Yes.
that is following you because your grandfather didn't do XYZ or did XYZ. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
your grandfather married a prostitute, therefore, all these things. Or if you're struggling with substance abuse, the attribution is, oh, there must be something you did,
Mm-hmm.
which is why, like you're bewitched. So nobody would think about this is a mental health issue
Yes.
that is not your fault. One, it's not your fault, you didn't
Yes.
bring it on, and it
Mm-hmm.
can be resolved without exorcism or
Yes.
or just prayer or going
Yes.
to a witch doctor, or
Yes.
because of the association that we had with it. So culture, like cultural lenses, really can feed stigma because the first thing we say, what is wrong with them?
Mm-hmm.
But if you had a broken leg,
Nobody would ask what's wrong with her.
yeah, they would say,
Everybody, yes.
yeah, we would never say that. But if you say, I'm feeling depressed, would say, why?
Why? And all your needs are met. Like, you have food on the table, you have a father who cares. Like, why are you depressed? And
Exactly.
you know what? I see that that also runs into the medical field, where
Yes.
when, especially for women, when you go to the doctor and or to the emergency room and you have all these symptoms and nobody can quite tell what's happening to you,
Uh-huh.
what do they usually say? Oh, it's an emotional thing, you
Exactly.
know. Yeah, go home, take a whatever, take an anxiety pill or whatever it is. But
Hmm.
they attribute your symptoms that cannot be measured, like for example temperature, or your blood work shows that you're
Hmm.
low on red blood cells. That is very measurable and it's very tangible, as
Hmm.
opposed to the mental health stigma. And as you mentioned, with collective cultures also comes the stigma, because we tend to hide,
Yes.
because everybody knows your business, so we tend to hide our business so that everybody doesn't know the
Hmm.
business. And then there's also this thing, as collective as we are, we never want to air our dirty laundry.
Of
you know
course.
Everybody, nobody should know. You even come up with concoctions of stories of how to explain how ABCD happened, when you know that it's not that way.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, the challenge with collectivist cultures also is there's a lot of shaming.
Mm-hmm.
So that instead of people rallying and saying, again, going back to the example, if you broke your leg and or if you had GI problems
Yes.
or you got sick from anything medical,
Mm-hmm.
everybody's like, oh, could you take them to the doctor or could you go buy them some medicine? People will be okay with supporting you and helping you getting the help you need. But
Yeah.
with mental health, from collectivist cultures, there's more shaming,
Yes.
which is why, like you're talking about people hiding their symptoms or their struggles, because we are really bad with shaming. And this has nothing to do with how educated or learned we are.
That's
We
true.
still shame, and even now, when, say, a family is struggling with a child who is maybe has a social anxiety or is dealing with depression, there's a lot of shaming about the attributions, going back to that, saying, oh, maybe you're not being a good parent to that child, that's why they are depressed. Oh, maybe that child is just being lazy, especially the perception of something like depression, that, oh, they're lazy, the symptoms, you're having trouble getting out of bed, you're like, oh yeah, you're just lazy, oh, you're just this. So the attributions bring a lot of shame, because
Mm-hmm.
again, the association is something negative that you are doing, that is why you have those symptoms. So
Mm-hmm.
stigma can be very dangerous because it hinders people from getting help.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So now, let's talk about the African culture, for example,
Okay.
which borrows, or okay, let me say the Afro-Caribbean culture, the Latinx culture. Also, there's a lot of African attributes. Let me
Hmm.
not say African attributes, but we have some of the same values.
Hmm.
And so, for example, I had a client tell me, who is Latino,
Hmm.
Latina, told me that something about how comfortable she was to talk to me, because she understood my culture, because I do talk about culture, and she knew that I wouldn't judge her or judge her parents based on some of the things she'd tell me.
Hmm.
So, for example, in the Latina culture, the chancleta or the chancla is the slipper,
Yes.
which is used to spank. So, spanking, but I'm just saying, in the American culture, using a slipper to spank is not the norm,
Hmm.
right? So, what are some of the things that you could give? What are some of the tangible examples you could give? Maybe using African culture, because that's what we are most familiar with, that could show us how negative cultural beliefs can be when it comes to mental health.
Mm.
Yes.
Examples
Mhm. So, for example, I gave the example of the
of,
woman
yeah,
who has postpartum depression, and everybody
that.
says whenever she gives birth, she goes loco, or she goes cuckoo, or she goes crazy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So what are some of the examples, the tangible examples you can give?
There are lots of examples. Let me see if I can think of some right now, because that's a normal experience, like experiencing postpartum.
Yeah.
Um, how we deal with grief
Okay.
is a big one, and I know we have a lot of subcultures and tribal and ethnic ways of dealing um, with grief, but that's another area where, and this is across cultures. I will focus on African cultures, but I've seen this in Eurocentric cultures as well, where
Mm-hmm.
there is there is really no way that people deal with grief in a healthy way from a cultural standpoint. Um,
Okay.
like from an American standpoint, people just bring you pies. I don't know why people bring pies. And your house is full of casseroles and pies. I'm like, why?
And flowers and fruit baskets.
And
Yes.
fruit baskets, and I'm thinking, okay, yeah. And so, and then we say you're in our thoughts. And I'm like, that's nice. I mean, that's okay. But
Mm-hmm.
there is such, from a Eurocentric standpoint, there's a pulling away because this is an individualistic culture. So
Yeah.
people give you space
Yes.
to grieve, whereas I think you need people to be present and supportive. Then, if we flip onto the other extent of African cultures, we are very much in your space.
Yes.
Now, we're really in your space, and we don't, we overcompensate for not knowing how to grieve or how to help you grieve effectively by
Mm-hmm.
sometimes over talking, over spiritualizing the experience, over culturalizing the experience, because we do have cultures who are businesslike. When there's somebody's going through a season of grief, they are all about, oh, we're here to take this our son's belongings,
Mm-hmm.
or we need to marry you off. That, oh, a young widow should not be alone, she needs to be married off.
Mm-hmm.
And so when she's in her season of grief, we perceive her as defective or suspicious, or what is she up to. So it's not a very healthy way of dealing with grief, or even any other person, not just a widow.
Mm-hmm.
There is the grief is normal, and I have issues with diagnosing people who are grieving.
I agree with you because
Yeah,
grief is a normal, it's a normal process. You have to go through the stages. It doesn't have to be from stage one. It's, it's not a cookie cutter way of dealing with grief. And sometimes we pathologize grief when
we
it's normal.
apologize grief. Yeah,
Unless now it's complicated grief, then that's another story. But then just
exactly.
grieving, yeah, that is not it's not a diagnosis. I do agree with you.
Yeah,
Maybe an
yeah.
adjustment disorder, I don't know, but it's really not a,
Always, it's an adjustment disorder, it's a change, it's something that wasn't present that came on. But culture can be very dangerous for grief, because we kind of just throw the everything at you, because we're like, okay, this is what you should do, or you need to come back to church, or you need to do this, or you need to do the other. When, so culture can get in the way in that sense, because there's a sweet balance of allowing people to adjust to the change, to sit with their sadness, to cry, to be angry, you
yes.
know, to do
Mm-hmm.
all those things that you do when you're grieving. But because we're so big on attributions, um,
Mm-hmm.
we want to fix it by saying, stop being sad. Oh, you need to get out of the house now. Oh, you need to do this and this and the other. And you're like, just allow them room to grieve. So that's an example. I think I've seen different cultures dealing differently with grief, and I'm yet to see one that kind of figures out how to do it well.
Well, yes, I think the Western culture, and I'm not saying everybody, but the Western culture is too, let's give you space.
Yeah.
And then the African culture, okay, let me not generalize either. The Kenyan culture is, we are in your space, right? Let's help you grieve and deal with your emotions. But then maybe we don't give you enough space.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why sometimes when the funeral is over, when the burial has taken place, then there's a breakdown because you never got the
Never
chance
got the
to
chance.
process your feelings because there was always people around. Um,
Yes.
So in that case, how would you advise people to deal with grief? I'll start by saying we should not tell people not to cry
Yeah.
because it is normal to cry
Hmm. Hmm.
when you're sad. So what else would you advise people to do?
There's the advice I give the person who's bereaved, and then
Hmm.
there's the advice I give the community that surrounds them.
The community that surrounds.
Yeah. So the community that surrounds people who are grieving, it is the balance of those two worlds. Don't give them too much personal space to grieve, but be measured in how much you show up.
Mm-hmm.
In African cultures, sometimes we may have a tendency of taking over.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
It's helpful, but that's why I'm using measuring, kind of reading the situation,
Mm-hmm.
and also reflecting on the relationship you have with the person who's grieving. Because the collectivist cultures we can miss that sometimes, where
Mm-hmm.
everybody, even people you don't engage with regularly, suddenly are in your house doing
Mm-hmm.
your laundry and
Mm-hmm.
preparing your kids for school. So I would say measuring and not taking over. I would say asking the bereaved person what would be most helpful
Mm-hmm.
for them. Now, not asking what can I do, but asking which of these options would be helpful. It's overwhelming when you're grieving.
Mm-hmm.
Um, or one of the things I never appreciate when people do is saying, "Call me if you need anything."
I know, yeah, because yeah.
They're not gonna call you.
Yeah.
So I would say being insightful.
Mm-hmm.
It's really necessary for the community to know how to show up, what would be the best way to show up. And it really depends on the relationship you have. Not taking over, not over spiritualizing,
Mm-hmm.
especially since for us, people who are faith based, we can really over spiritualize the process, which can very much stifle people's ability to grieve.
Grieve, yes, the grieving process, yes.
Yeah,
That's
like saying, "Oh,
he's in
we,
heaven.
they're in heaven." Yes, they're in heaven, but they're not present. We miss them.
Yes,
So
yes.
it's okay to cry about it. It's okay to be sad about it. So giving people space to do that,
Mm-hmm.
um, checking periodically is something we don't do. You mentioned a really important thing, that when people lose a loved one, sometimes after the funeral, everybody just drops off.
Mm-hmm.
And so periodic check-ins is really important for people to do, to just, and normalizing the process is really important, and also keeping an eye out, and maybe sometimes just drop food, bring something. Don't ask so much, just do it, but in a measured way. It's different if I say, "Okay, I'm going to just order some food and have it delivered at your house," or "I'm going to cook some food and deliver it at your house," than saying, "I'm going to come to your kitchen and cook for you."
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
That's,
very, very different. So support, and know it's cultural, and not all our cultural pieces are negative. They're not all bad, but
mm-hmm.
it's calibrating, because now we know how some of those can be detrimental to a healthy grieving process.
So now talking about mental health, and you just mentioned something, and that was what I was gonna go to next. So not all aspects of culture are negative. What are some of the positive cultures when it comes to not just grieving, but just mental health as a whole? But
Oh,
before we talk about the positive attributes, boundaries. What is your take on boundaries and mental health and culture?
oh, come on. Boundaries, that is broad. What about boundaries?
So, because, for example, if you're from a collective culture, the boundaries are not very clean and not very clear, right?
Yeah.
If you're from an individualistic culture, the boundaries are very rigid, right? Okay, so let's talk about rigid and healthy boundaries when it comes to mental health. So let me use those two words, right? Rigid versus porous versus healthy.
Yes.
So I have depression, or you know that something is wrong with me. What boundaries would you advise my friends or the people around me to observe?
Mm. I mean, that's a tricky one, because the framework is the relationships they have with you.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you're my friend. So if you're dealing with depression, I'll be all up in your space
Mm-hmm.
because we have that, we're sisters.
Mm-hmm.
So I will be in your space. So I would say boundaries should be determined by relationships.
Okay.
And I know I'll come back to that to qualify that a little bit. But when you don't have, you know, you and I are aware of just how you have circles of people around you. You have your inner circle, then you have the next circle and the next circle.
Mm-hmm.
Using that to determine boundaries with people, especially collectivist cultures. And it's that thing of, I know I can come into your house and I could get into your kitchen and fix myself a sandwich. But if we are not that close, I shouldn't be able to just assume, it's Dolly, you know, we're Kenyan people, let's just do that. So, and especially when somebody's dealing with mental health, thank God for technology that you can text, you can
Mm-hmm.
call, you can leave voicemail, you can inbox something to communicate in ways that are not overwhelming. Because when somebody is dealing with depression, every little thing is overwhelming.
That's true.
You know, something as that may seem so trivial, like taking a shower or cleaning up their living room, doing their dishes, can be very difficult. And if we don't have boundaries with people like that, they can be very anxious about having us in their spaces.
That's true. It adds to the problem. Mm-hmm.
It adds to the problem. We are well intended. Oh, we haven't seen Dolly in a while. Let's go. Let's just go to her house and, you know. But that can be very overwhelming because already, if she's dealing with depression and she's feeling like you guys have no boundaries with her, that you can just walk in and take over and start picking up her trash and her, you know, laundry off the floor, it also is very humiliating.
Mm-hmm.
You think you're helping from the outside. You're like, I'll just help her do the laundry. I'll, you know, I'll do some grocery, I'll clean the dishes. But then from somebody who is so depleted and is depressed, they're feeling like, there we go again. I am incompetent. I can't even take care of my house. I'm this and this. So boundaries can be tricky there. What I would recommend is one, asking permission.
Mm-hmm.
May I come? And if they say no, you know, I usually prefer saying, asking, you know, when is a good time that I could come? You know, being gentle in kind of figuring out, are they going to crack the door open for me to come, than busting the door open and saying, I'm here to help you. Oh, we're doing an intervention, Dolly. You're going to get out of bed. And that is more damaging.
Mm-hmm.
So boundaries there can be very tricky for people who are dealing with mental health, because we can make assumptions, we can be judgmental also of people, and that hurts them more than helps them. We don't do boundaries very well as African
Culturally.
people. Culturally, I'm thinking about it.
Yeah. But it's because of our collective cultures, and it's very well intentioned. You
It's
know,
oh,
we're
it's
it's
very
a
well
village. It takes a village
intended.
to raise a child. You know, family first. You know, we are from the same village, or we are from the same area. We need to help each other. But yeah.
Yeah, but I wish we would ask first, because the thing with boundaries is you want to ask people permission. If you could come, if you can. And sometimes boundaries can be as simple as, you know, I'm not gonna call you after 9 o'clock at night.
That's true. Yeah.
And it's not that you're being so, you know, rigid and unwelcome, but it's respecting that you have things you need to take care of. You have your routines with your family that you need to do, and that's respecting your boundaries. And that's not saying, because then I'll be intrusive if I want to cackle on the phone at 10 o'clock at night, because I'm checking on you, I'm being a sister, but then
Mm-hmm.
I'm not respecting your boundaries as far as your family is concerned.
So, what are the positive aspects then of culture?
The positive aspects of culture are many. Oh my goodness. I love being from a collectivist cultures, because our culture, collectivist cultures have a lot of buffers.
Mm-hmm.
Because we are very close knit as a community, it means that people are supportive. People, you can count on the village
Mm-hmm.
to show up for you. like one of the things that we do as a culture is if you have a loss, we immediately think, oh, you must need resources, you must
Mm-hmm.
need
Mm-hmm.
financial help.
Yes.
And so people rally. The beauty of collectivist cultures is we rally. We people automatically think, what would be best for this family at this point, maybe let's contribute some money. It's very rare that I've gone to cultures that are not collectivists when there's a need in the community and people immediately say, hey, let's give.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a benefit of being in collectivist cultures is people are physically supportive, present, supportive, resourceful, supportive in their resources and pouring into you. Um, Collectivist cultures tend to be more faith based.
Mm-hmm.
And so I remember some of the early research I did was just the salience of spirituality or religiosity to preventing progression of mental health issues or severity of mental health.
Mm-hmm.
People who are more faith centered, and if I may say, because I think I surveyed mostly people who have the Christian faith, people who have an affiliation, one with a faith based community, like a church, a fellowship, or something like that, and people who believe in God and ascribe to a faith are more likely during their times of struggle to lean on God and say, I will make it because God is with me. God is going to strengthen me to do this thing than people who are not faith based. And
Mm-hmm.
now I say spirituality and religiosity because not everybody from collectivist cultures is relationship based as far as their faith.
Yes, that's true. Mm-hmm.
Yes. They will believe in a God, but they may not necessarily affiliate with a church or a
A
fellowship
temple or yes. Mm-hmm.
or whatever it is that they may be a part of. Um, but ascribing to a faith really is a buffer for mental health for a lot of collectivist cultures. And also our perception of I'm never alone because I'm from this culture is a buffer for us as well. So those are probably some of the major benefits of the cultures that we're from that helps with just having good mental health.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So now I'm thinking about culture and how difficult sometimes it is to navigate, especially if you're trying to go away from the norm, right? So, for example, you're bereaved and you don't want people in your house. That creates a lot of chaos because you're from a collectivist culture, right? So
Mhm.
now, how do you advise our viewers or our listeners when it comes to navigating culture, especially when you want to establish your own norm that is not does not agree with your culture, does not go well with your culture, or does not sit well with people from your culture? How can we go about that?
Ask that again. Let me hear you say that again.
How can our viewers respectfully navigate cultural norms
Hmm.
that don't serve their mental health?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Huh. You know what? It's good to and I'm going to, and I don't know where the viewers here are from. They may be people who are, they may be anywhere in the world.
Yes.
Um
Or from any culture.
or
Mm-hmm.
from any culture. It's really important to look at what aspects of culture are helpful and which ones are not. I think we started our conversation today thinking about there's some things we do because we were born doing them, we were raised doing them, and we never questioned them because our mothers were doing them, our grandmothers were doing them, and we just did them. But some of those things are not helpful anymore. They're not fostering good mental health. And so it's, I would say, I would probably encourage people who are listening and watching us today to think about your whys, why you're doing the things you're doing, whether they're cultural based or they're just habits, or things that you engage in, how you're navigating life, and thinking about, are those things functional? because we like saying, oh, we're used to doing this and this. Oh, we're Kenyan people, we do this. Oh, we're Afro Caribbean people, we do this. I would take a good look, and especially once you've adulted,
Mm-hmm.
to you're able to decide what do you keep and what do you shed, because some cultural practices may not necessarily be healthy, like how, say, you're raising your children. um,
Mm-hmm.
you talked about spanking. Just because you were spanked doesn't mean you should spank.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
But just because you are not spanked doesn't mean you should not spank. It's figuring out moderation is everything.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because there is no reasoning with a 3-year-old.
Yes.
They may need to feel a little bit of pain for them to be able to make a change. I'm not saying be abusive and traumatize your children, but figuring out a healthy way of correcting behavior, say, for the children. A
Mm-hmm.
child being rude and in the way they're voicing their thoughts and opinions to you, um, is not is not a healthy way of communicating and relating. So the opposite end of that is, some of us were raised that you're there to be seen and not be
Mm-hmm.
heard. Again,
Mm-hmm.
that's cultural, right? That
Yes.
you
Mm-hmm.
never spoke up when your elders were present, and you certainly didn't speak back to your elders.
Mm-hmm.
um, but now, regardless of location, whether people in the Western world or whether they're in their countries of origin, in Africa, in the Caribbean, in Asia, wherever it may be, you can't, that stifles the voice of a child, so that as they become adults, so when is the right time for them to start speaking?
Exactly. Yeah.
And so, if we grow up without being empowered to ever speak up at all, then we become very timid and anxious adults
Mm-hmm.
who are sitting in a classroom but cannot even ask the professor a question, even though you didn't understand a thing they said.
Mm-hmm.
Because the professor, I remember my first year in college when I'm sitting with all these American kids and they're all talking at the same time. And I'm like, oh my goodness, how rude. And
Yes.
then I realized, wait, you're going to need to learn how to be assertive and speak up. And
Mm-hmm.
eventually I got the hang of it, thankfully, very quickly,
Mm-hmm.
because there was a participation grade on the line. You better speak up in class, otherwise you're losing those points. And what am I saying here is finding that balance of how do you empower your kids to find their voice without throwing away the cultural pieces that are important.
Mm-hmm. And I think in that aspect, the important issue is respect, because
Yes.
your child can actually disagree with you respectfully, right?
Respectfully, yes.
Yes.
Yes. That's a good cultural thing that I think parents are still struggling with, because they can be respectful but assert themselves and voice what they're thinking, because we send them to school and they're taught how to use their voice.
Mm-hmm.
They come home and we say, don't speak up to me.
Yes.
That affects their mental health. That has a direct impact on their mental health because it
And it's
affects
also
their self.
confusing.
It's very confusing. Because if you stifle a child from speaking up, eventually they start thinking either I'm not good enough, I don't have anything to say, I must not be smart. They spiral into this negative thought process because of you telling them don't speak up.
Mm-hmm.
Suddenly they lose their confidence, their self-worth drops and dips. But at the same time, you don't want to be in a shouting match with them. So healthy communication is also something that culture can really help us with.
Yes. So now, actually, so I want us to talk specifically about our youth, because I think that's where we are seeing the most effect of our culture on their mental health.
Okay.
So I remember there's a time, I can't remember what state it was. There was like, I think 4 or 5 young, youth pretty much, who had committed suicide. I think kids in their teens mostly, or early 20s. And that is definitely because it has a very direct correlation with our culture and mental health and how we deal with issues.
Mhm.
So, and not to say that I do not know who the parents were and all that stuff, but what I'm just saying is, so I grow up and I'm told not to speak to my elders. Someone challenging your elders, like why, asking the question why, which is a very developmentally appropriate question to ask. is considered rude
Yeah.
because you're questioning the parent.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so these kids, as you said, go out where they're told to use their voice, to speak up, and then they come home, they're told, when they try to practice what they're taught in school, which is where they are most of the time, they come home and they're told they're being rude, or wamemea pembe, like you're growing horns, or whatever it is you're told, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this brings our kids to such a conflict and conflict laden environment, because
Yeah.
they don't know what to do. Plus, on top of that, there's issues like spanking,
Mm-hmm.
or issues like some of the trauma we have, which we might call generational, or whatever we might call it. Some of the
Mm-hmm.
trauma we have that is unresolved because maybe we had uh, parents who are not as loving or as affectionate as we wanted, because we all have different love languages.
Mm-hmm.
So we come here and then we have children, and we're trying to raise them as though they were in an African country, a Caribbean country, or an Asian country, and
Mm-hmm.
yet they're in the US. So they are very American, right? But we're trying to raise them as though the American culture does not even exist.
Mm-hmm.
What would you suggest?
Ooh, to the parents.
Yes,
To
the
the
parents,
parents.
because it's the parents who are raising them and causing all this chaos, right?
I think it's really important to. I always challenge parents, and I say, you know what? It was primarily your decision to migrate to a Western culture, and yes, your intention, I would assume, was to improve the quality of life of the whole family. But it is the adults in the family who made that decision. The children did not ask for this.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, sometimes we are very nearsighted. We don't think about how we're going to raise the children in a culture that's different from what we were raised in.
Mm-hmm.
So I would recommend openness to family, to parents, to learning about the cultures that they're immersing themselves in, and do your research, learn the systems. It's not just about, okay, we're here to have a better quality of life, because children are sent to school, and even as parents, you're going to a workplace out, you're not living in a bubble, but
Yeah.
you're sending your kids to school. They are making friends with kids from who are different from them. They are taught in systems that are different from them. They're socialized in systems outside of your home that are different from them. So I think it behooves the parents to learn about what's going on out there.
Mm-hmm.
How different is parenting? Learning the social systems and the impact, learning the trends around you, not waiting for the child to come and say, by the way, mom, this is what's going on these days. Because the mistake sometimes we make is we move to, in this case, we move to the US, and we are only interested in the economic benefits of being in America, and we don't account for all the other levels, all the other aspects that will impact how we do life. And so the expectation is, and this is true of, again, Asian cultures, Latina cultures, Afro Caribbean,
European.
even
Mm-hmm.
European cultures,
Mm-hmm.
where we think, okay, we're going to be in this bubble and we will still maintain everything about our cultures, except the economic part. We're going to be doing better economically.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would put the weight of it on the adults in the family, the parents, to learn what spaces your children are in. Learn what this society we are in is offering your kids, and so that you can stay ahead of them, ahead of the kids, so that they don't surprise you with stuff. Will they surprise you with stuff? Of course,
Mm-hmm.
because with technology things move really fast. I can barely keep up. But if we stay ahead of them, it means that we have a little bit of information that we can have conversations rather than World War III when they bring up an issue. So
Mm-hmm.
that we are not combative every time they say, well, I want to go do this and this with my friends. And you're saying, when I was growing up, we didn't even get to do that. My pet peeve now is parents saying, we walked 6 miles to school. We fetched water. And so what do you want to do? You want your kid to walk to school? There's a school bus. So
Yes.
things like that. So openness from a parental standpoint is something I probably would recommend. And when you're open, it means when your child asks why, you don't immediately think you never asked your parents why. No, you think
Mhm.
about we're in a different culture, they're empowered to speak up, and then you become more open to say, all right, what is going on? Because I would, this is something I'm passionate about. I would probably ask parents to be more attentive and listen more before we respond. Not listen, not wait for them to finish so you can speak, but listen and take in their content, simmer with it, and then respond. Because unfortunately, you've mentioned examples of kids who have died by suicide. Um, and I'm not going into a blaming game here.
Mhm.
Um,
Certainly
you,
not. Yes.
yeah,
Mhm.
I'm not, but it would be helpful if we would listen more and see them more. And sometimes there are no words spoken, but if we listened more, we could hear their silence.
Mhm.
We could notice their disengagement. We will notice their passiveness. We would notice their dysphoric behavior. We would
Mhm.
notice their sadness. We would
Mhm.
notice their dissociation. So there's so much data that we miss when the way we see our families is purely cultural. And
Mhm.
that breaks my heart when these kids cry out for help, but we didn't hear them because our answer is always no.
Mhm.
Now, I
Mhm.
know these kids didn't die for no reason or for trivial things, but it could may have been something. Say, I'm just using a random example because I don't know who you're talking about.
Mhm.
What if this is a child who said, Mom, I want to lock my hair?
Mhm.
And they're in high school, they're teenagers, and they said, I want to lock my hair. And your lenses of your culture are, oh no, people who lock their hair are fill in the blanks.
Mhm.
They think of
Mhm.
all the things. Telling that child, no, you cannot, and they say, ask why. And all we say is, because I said so.
Yeah. Mhm.
Now, that can, from a teenager standpoint, that's their world.
It is their world.
They
Mhm. And
was
it's a big deal.
It's like you telling your son, you will no longer play soccer. Why, mommy? Because I said so.
Mhm.
You have to be able to see this kid. You have to be able to, they are a human being. They're not babies. They have a voice. They hear, they communicate, they think. So giving them space to say, here is what I'm thinking and here is why. Now, I'm not saying you should agree with everything they say. I'm
Mhm.
just saying, can you listen to them and share your perspective without necessarily going back to your upbringing 40 years ago and saying,
Mhm.
when I was growing up, we were not allowed to lock our hair? That's besides the point. Maybe you
Exactly.
can say, when you're 18, you can lock your hair,
Mhm.
but maybe not now. Stuff
Yeah.
like that. And I'm talking about communication, acknowledging, listening, seeing, because listening and seeing these kids saves their lives.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I just want to be sensitive because I just mentioned a random thing. Just because a child commits suicide does not mean that the parents were not listening. It does not mean sometimes there's a lot of things. There's
A
chemical
lot of
imbalance. There's
factors.
a lot of things. I just want to be sensitive and mention that and put that disclaimer there so that it's not perceived that
Not at
children
all.
commit suicide because of uh, parents who are rigid. There's a time I was talking to a friend of mine, and we were talking about how growing up we did not talk about emotions. Like you come to your mom and you're crying, like they're not like, oh, what are you feeling, da 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 da, so I
Yeah.
was on the phone. Actually, I was on the phone with this friend of mine, and her children are playing, two children,
Right.
and they were fighting about, like, no, one of them was getting really upset because the other one was better at whatever game they were playing.
Mm-hmm.
And so the one who was getting upset would come to the mom, and the mom is like, you want to play? You go and play. Like, like, I can't help you. So I told the mom, why don't you just ask her how she's feeling
Mm-hmm.
and just acknowledge her feelings and tell her, you know what, it must be frustrating, right? So the kid comes, because the kid kept on interrupting the conversation. So the
Yeah.
kid comes and she's like, "Mommy, da, 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 da." And then the mom was like, "Oh yeah, that must feel really bad, right? I
Hmm.
hear you." Guess what? The crying stopped, and the kid went back and started playing. And she was like, "Oh my gosh, that worked like magic." And I'm like, "Yeah, all you need to do is acknowledge and even put yourself in their shoes and
Yes.
imagine if you felt that way, how would you feel? And say, yeah, that must feel very bad. I know you're frustrated, right? And as soon as she acknowledged the kid was off playing again. And she was like, oh, wow, that worked like magic. She's like, I have a new trick under my under
That's
my hat.
good.
Yes, yes. So I think we have to, and I know sometimes we make fun of the feelings, things, and all that stuff, but I think it's very important, and especially when it comes to even
Mm.
for us,
Oh yeah.
if you're at work and you're feeling sad, maybe somebody has been mean to you, or you've been overlooked, for something, and
Mhm.
somebody just like tells you, get over it. I mean, you're not going to feel good if somebody acknowledges and says, you know what, I know you're
Mhm.
disappointed, you were expecting that promotion and you didn't get it, and I feel you, you feel much better, and you just
Exactly.
feel much better.
We all just want to be seen.
Mm-hmm.
We want to be acknowledged, like you said. We want to be validated.
Mm-hmm.
And we want our experience to be normalized.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we don't normalize, then we are pathologizing.
That's true.
That's what we're doing. And
Yeah.
so even with a child, whether it's children playing, or I use this example with parents quite a bit, if your 16-year-old has a crush on a boy, or they even go on their little dates, and they're now boyfriend and girlfriend, and they're 16, 17, and I'm not going to interfere with parents' idea of when should your kids date. That's your business. But then they get their hearts broken. They break up, their relationship ends, and your 16, 17-year-old comes home crying, and they're really sad, and they don't want to eat, and they tell you, my life is over. That's puppy love. It's their first love. They
Mm-hmm.
threw themselves at this. Now, I'm going to go on a limb here and say an African parent is going to say what?
I told you not to have a relationship with this boy. That's why I told you.
And
Why
we'll
are you
tell
having a
them,
boyfriend? Hmm?
and we'll tell them, get over it. It's not like you are married to them.
Yes.
Move on. You'll be fine. It's you're only a teenager.
Or I didn't like him anyway.
We say those things, but this kid is truly heartbroken.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so a better approach is to acknowledge that they're heartbroken, they're hurting.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it doesn't mean that they were going to marry this boy or this girl, but the bottom line is they're feeling emotional pain.
Mm-hmm.
Give them a hug, validate them, listen to what happened, because they may have a story to tell about, and then this is what he did, and now he's with another girl, and whatever it may be. Just listen. Whatever you're thinking in your head about that, go talk to your spouse about. Go talk to your friends. Go to your girlfriends and say, "These kids." You
Yeah.
can do that away from the kid, but when they're in front of you, validate them, listen
Mm-hmm.
to them. It's even if their pet fish died, don't go like, it's a fish. No, they're like, that was their fish. You be present. I still remember, you know back in the day, watching like the Cosby Show, and Rudy's little fish died. They had a whole funeral
Mm-hmm.
for the fish, because it was important to the child. You can't
Yeah.
just say, even though the funeral was in the toilet, and just throw it in the toilet and flush it. But that is meaning that you're acknowledging developmentally where they are and what the
Mm-hmm.
emotional experience is. If you dismiss them at that age, which happened to most of us,
Mm-hmm.
this is how it follows us. Because if you dismiss them at that age from expressing themselves, and you don't validate the emotion, then they become older and they are adults, and they don't even know how to emote. They
Mm-hmm.
don't know how to express. They don't know how to feel pain, When somebody breaks their heart, they just push it down and move on. And we all know how that
And
goes.
move on in quotes.
Yeah, they move on, but
Yeah.
it's sitting in there, and that's toxic
Mm-hmm.
because then eventually what happens? We explode
Exactly.
or we carry that baggage to the next person.
Exactly. And so now we have divorces, we have people who are not happy at work, who cannot speak for themselves, who, as you said, who cannot be assertive, who are now not happy at work, not because they don't love their career, but
Mhm.
they're not able to speak up.
Yeah,
And all these little things which are cultural really do affect our mental health, because if you're not happy at work,
they do.
or if you're not taught how to express yourself, now
Hmm.
you never express yourself in a relationship, even when you should.
Yes.
And then first of all, you tend to navigate towards people who will support what you feel, right? Like if you're not expressive, I mean, if you're not able to express yourself, chances are you might end up, not always, but you might end up with someone who overpowers you and who doesn't
Mhm.
allow you to express yourself. And then there's a divorce or unhappy marriage, and then there's children who are brought into, it's just such a vicious
It's a,
cycle.
yeah, it's a cycle. So we have to, any parents who are listening today and you have young kids, hold space for those kids to express their emotions and validate those emotions, even if they're angry. And
Mm-hmm.
don't tell a child, don't be angry or don't cry. You know how, I don't know about you, Dolly, but when we were growing up, I don't remember, this didn't happen to me, but I remember when you would see a parent with a child and they're spanking them and telling them, usilie, now
Mm-hmm.
usilie, Leah wanted, don't
Yeah.
cry. I dare you to cry. You're actually inflicting pain on the child, and a natural response is to cry.
Mm-hmm.
But you're telling them, I dare you to cry. I'm going to give you something to cry about.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens? They learn how to stifle
Mm-hmm.
that. So right now, what would I recommend? If they allow the child to even be angry, but
Mm-hmm.
tell them you can be angry and destructive. You need
Exactly.
to reel in your anger because you have
Mm-hmm.
to teach them how to regulate their emotions in a healthy way.
Mm-hmm.
Not just saying, oh, when you're happy is when you can laugh and rejoice. No, if you're sad, you can cry. If you're, as long as it's not an unhealthy way of expressing, yelling and doing all that, it's okay to be disappointed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So there's lots of things we can talk about, just that aspect of how the impact of emotions on mental health, but there's
Mm-hmm.
plenty there, but there's yet hope because a lot more parents are learning.
Exactly.
If it takes your kids teaching you how, be
Mm-hmm.
teachable as a parent.
Mm-hmm. And it's okay. You know, one thing I have to mention is it's okay to give yourself grace
Oh, yes.
where you've gone wrong.
Yeah.
You know, and for some of us, even leave alone the cultural aspect, even in a traditional home, whether you're completely in Kenya and all you're doing, or Asia or Trinidad, wherever you are, and all you're doing is that culture, usually we learn from our mistakes. The
Yeah.
first child is the one who gets the brunt of our mistakes, and then
Exactly.
as we get more children, progressively we become better, we learn from our mistakes and all that stuff. But I think it's important for parents to give themselves grace, give
Yeah,
yourself
it
grace,
is. Yeah.
because unless you are an evil parent, most of us make our mistakes because we want the best for our children and we think that what we are doing is the
Hmm.
best. But
Yeah.
then we also have to acknowledge that even though our intentions were good, if the damage was done, our intentions don't matter because the
Hmm.
damage is already done. And so if you know you've done any damage and you have to talk to your kids or search your heart or however you're going to find out if damage has been done, then we
Hmm.
have to put our ego down. We have to
Hmm.
put our pride aside and apologize and tell our kids, you know what, I did this because this is how I was brought up. I did not know better. I thought this
Yeah.
was good. But now, in teaching myself, in working on myself, I know that what I did to you at this time was a mistake.
Yes.
Please forgive me,
Yes. I
right?
like that. Apologizing is not easy.
No, especially when you come from a culture where you were a kid, had no rights, pretty much, right?
Yeah. I mean, apologizing to a child, especially from any culture, is not easy, but it's a very powerful thing because you're also teaching the child that you're not perfect.
Yes.
Because otherwise, because I've had some kids, actually, I've had a young woman tell me they're terrified of dating
Mm.
because the mother and the father were the firsts. The father married the first girlfriend,
Mm.
and they've been married for years on end and never
Okay.
dated other people. So this kid is kind of hesitant to date because he's saying, my parents are perfect. They did it perfectly. They don't make
Mm-hmm.
mistakes and they don't. So it's okay for your kids to see your vulnerability and for you sometimes to share some of the mistakes you've made, whether it's about raising them or about making other life decisions. And you use your discretion, of course, and age appropriate things to share, of course.
Mm-hmm.
But teaching your kids that it's okay to make mistakes, that you make mistakes too, because that empowers them that when they make mistakes, they don't feel like they can't come to you, because you do want them to come to you. You want them to seek wisdom from you, to seek counsel from you, to bounce their ideas off of you. But if you have this persona or presentation of you always get it right, you don't make mistakes, those kids are not coming to talk to you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the bar is too high.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Odera, we have talked about a lot of things. And actually, every point we talked about can be hours and hours long
Oh
of
yes.
conversation, but this was just like a summary. I want to thank you so much for your time. And I would like to urge our viewers. I'll give you, a chance to give your parting shot. But actually, give your parting shot. What is the important thing? What is the take-home message?
The take home message. Wow, I'm this is a topic I'm passionate about, and thank you for inviting me, Dolly, to just converse with you on these issues. My parting thought is tomorrow is another day. So you didn't get it right yesterday. Tomorrow you get to start over. You get to reset. You get to learn something new. Be open. Be flexible. Be teachable. You never know who you can learn from, regardless of their age, their culture, their ethnicity, their race. Somebody can teach you something. And if you're struggling with some mental health issues, you're not alone. We are not perfect. Dolly and I, we're not perfect. We've had our challenges and we've worked
Mhm,
through them. Seek support, talk to somebody, message us, and we can walk you through where you can get help. None of us is exempt from dealing with mental health issues. As long as you're flesh and blood, walking this earth, there's something that is going, you will encounter that will kind of put a stressor on the resources you have. So you're not alone, regardless of your culture. Culture is a good thing. Embrace it,
mhm,
love it, but
mhm,
take out the bad stuff and keep the good ones.
mhm. And I would end by saying, I love culture. Culture is beautiful. It gives you different textures, different experiences, and all that. But I think we need to search our hearts, search our cultures, and see where we can make improvements. Where we've gone wrong, because some things we do are pretty much just wrong. There's no two ways about it. Just search your heart, search your culture, and just look at yourself, examine yourself, and see where have I gone wrong, or where can I improve.
Yeah,
And you know what? Work on yourself, have an open mind, and learn from other people and see how that would benefit you. And
absolutely.
with that, I want to thank you so much, Dr. Odera, for coming
Thank
and
you.
joining us.
Mhm.
And thank you for those who have joined us, and share this video and let's spread the word. Mental health is important. And as I said, Dr. Lilian is a clinical psychologist, and I'm a marriage and family therapist.
Thank
Bye
you.
for now. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, guys.